I don't do well, I'm sure you guys will let me know. I have questions being like, that was great. Didn't really answer it. Thank you to everyone sticking around as well. I realize this is kind of the last session after 2 long and intense days. I was mentally preparing myself to be sitting down. I have one colleague, Lucy, sitting in the back, and I was gearing myself up for her to be the only audience member. So for everyone sitting here, I'm really excited. I hope I can provide or share a bit of wisdom of things that I've learned, especially in kind of the last 6 months. For those who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name's Isaac Carroll. I'm the Sales Enablement Lead at Full Story, which is a US-based company, and I work as the APAC Enablement Lead. Like what I've found out a lot of people do here, started my career in sales. So I've spent about 10 years working in tech sales across large international companies, smaller startups, kind of everywhere in between. So I've got to experience a lot of different flavors. And then like everyone else here, figured out that while there were elements of sales that I enjoyed or that I found satisfying, ultimately there was a better place to be. And that ended up being enablement. And that's a story for another time. But if you're looking at this picture thinking, what the hell is this? What is he talking about? How is this connected? This is the closest Google image that I could find to a luncheon that I was at about 2 weeks ago. And it really felt like the vibe was kind of like evil genius table, like we're plotting to do something nefarious. And I kid you not, it was like brick walls all around, big leather-bound chairs, and it was an executive luncheon. And before I even walked into this room, I had a large bit of imposter syndrome because I'm not an executive. I was kind of introduced by a colleague and said, oh, you take my place. I think you'll learn a lot from this. So I was already kind of walking into this with a little bit of fear. And sitting down and listening to a lot of sales enablement strategies, listening to C-suite and MDs and people talk big picture business. And the first thing here, which was exciting, was that I could follow along. Right? I was understanding what they were talking about and I was getting it. But then I got further along and we started talking about sales enablement strategies, processes, tools, what was going on. And then I noticed something that was a little bit scary. And they kind of broken enablement into 4 or 5 different pillars. And it was something like processes, knowledge, systems, and something else. And in the knowledge section, in one of about 6 different bullet points, was kind of like onboarding, just like buried in there. And that was it. That was all that they'd written about it. And I was already sitting in this room being like, you know what, you don't need to, don't be the young person just like speaking up just for the sake of being heard. Like if you're going to say something, say it for a reason. And when I saw that, I almost kind of jumped out of my seat and was like, no, just wait. I'm sure someone else in the room is going to pick this and say something. And then we kept talking about it and it kept going and no one else was saying anything. And at this point, I kind of had to put my hand up and say, guys, I'm a little bit nervous. I'm a little bit worried that we're only thinking about onboarding as the concept of the transferring of knowledge. Like the knowledge of a system or the knowledge of a process or the knowledge of a product, right? What about the other elements? What about the fundamental thing, which is the skill of being a salesperson? And what was scarier still was that everyone turned around like I'd just blown their minds. And they looked at me thinking, oh my God, this is incredible. Where have you come from these innovative ideas? And I was sitting there being like, no, this is not what it should be. I shouldn't be blowing your mind with what I'm saying. This, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room understand that, that's just the baseline. That is the minimum expectation of what onboarding should entail. It is equipping sellers to be ready to be successful in selling, right? Which requires that fundamental skill of sales. So, as always, with all TED-related talks, there's going to be a couple of stats that come in, right? Why should we care about onboarding? Why is it important? What have we learned or can gain? So, a couple of days ago when I was preparing for this, crash course in a whole bunch of different documents and research and white papers and trying to find something interesting. And a few really cool things stand out. So the first one, and this was from a study from a performance consulting group in the States in around 2018, 2019. Formal onboarding, come on, there we go, saw reps reach full productivity, or 60.7% of reps reach full productivity within 6 months, with 85% reaching full productivity in 11 months. Comparing this to non-formal onboarding, only about 40% reached it in 6 months, and about 60% reached it in 11 months. So a lot of people have been talking over the last day or so about activity and about process. Well, that's productivity, right? How effective are you in doing the tasks that you need to do to be successful? So a formal onboarding helps them do that quicker, successfully quicker, right? Another important thing that we're all thinking about at the moment is employee churn, right, or employee retention. So a successful formal onboarding process meant that employees were 58% more likely to remain with your organization after 3 years. And then finally, they saw an increase of quota attainment of up to 6.7%. So a successful formal onboarding process spans across the entire org. This is something that so many different stakeholders are going to be caring about. And these are me cherry-picking stats. I can guarantee you that if you go into this further and you do your own research, you will see so many other reasons of why onboarding can be and needs to be successful and how much of an impact that can have on your organization. I'm going to do the classic thing. I'm going to flip it around the other way, right? Cost of failure. This was a terrifying one. And just as a quick show of hands, because I know we've got companies from a whole spectrum of size and industries, quick show of hands, how many organizations here have a formal onboarding process? Amazing. So that's about 70 to 80%. Brilliant. A whole bunch of studies that I saw, so only about 50% of organizations generally have a formal onboarding process, with 75% of all reps responding that their onboarding was a manager or a rep, which is terrifying. Scarier still, only 11% actually reported that they had a good quality onboarding and that they felt equipped to do their job, right? So now let's talk about that little employee churn for a second. On average, depending on the segment and the region and a whole bunch of other conditions for an employee, it will take you about 5 months to rehire that employee, right? And financially speaking, and this is a broad thing, so I'm sure people can have different stats around this, but generally speaking, it will cost you, in hard and soft costs, $115,000 to rehire an employee. And onboarding is where you set the stage for this. So if you are not successful with onboarding, and if you do not set them up for success, right, they're not going to be successful in their role. They're not going to be happy. They're going to churn. You're going to have to rehire. And since we're in sales enablement, we all know that if someone churns out of their role, it's not like their quota disappears. It's not like suddenly the team has to achieve less. That still sits with the rest of the team. So now they are having a harder time because they're trying to lift a heavier load because they've missed someone. I think we can all agree that onboarding is important, but it always helps to throw in a few stats. So does anyone happen to know, by the way, what I might be referring to when I'm showing this image? IKEA? Onboarding. Both, perfect, in different ways. So, overwhelmed, stuff too much, right? I might steal that one, that was pretty good. Overboarding is stunning, right? So one thing that I've felt when I've seen or experienced onboardings myself before is it's kind of like this, or another image I was going to use was Tetris, right? There's a lot of companies out there that it's almost like they get this laundry list from different stakeholders or different departments of this is all the stuff we need to fit in, or the stuff we need them to do. And then what you do is you get the time frame, depending on size, it could be 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 2 months, whatever. And then you cram it all into there and you just find the time and you're sitting there going, they have 7 hours today. So I'm going to give them 7 hours worth of learning. And now they know it forever, right? Yeah, everyone laughing realizes how crazy that sounds. And when I started with Full Story, the very first thing I did was say, okay, take me through the sales onboarding. If I'm going to be running this, if I'm going to be delivering this, I need to experience what they're going through. And what I got terrified me because it was an email with an Excel document with like 150 cells worth of watch this thing, read this thing, complete this task, and a whole bunch of video recordings. I was getting scared as I scanned down because there was, and I promise you this was true, not a single live session for anyone in APAC. And I was terrified. And I turned around to our regional lead and said, this is not happening. It can't, because our job in sales enablement is to represent our customers and to be customer obsessed. And in this instance, our customers are the sales team. And if I went ahead with that document and said, okay, let's just do it, that's not in their best interest. So I said, can I have the opportunity to change it around a little bit, to kind of build it from the ground up and do something to help these people out? And the lucky thing about being in a startup is that our regional lead, Monica, said, absolutely. You have 4 weeks until the next salesperson starts. Let's see what you can do. Right? So that was, I can tell you, a pretty hectic 4 weeks. And what I want to do now is share some of the learnings that I experienced going through this, some of the preliminary results we saw across the team, and some anecdotal feedback as well, just to kind of back up the experience that these teams went through. So there was a few kind of key steps that I went through here when considering building an onboarding program and what you should be considering. MVP. Who's heard of this term before? Just quick show of hands. Brilliant. Tim, what comes to mind when we see MVP?
Done is better than perfect. Minimum viable product.
Minimum viable products, right? Product management term. We've all probably heard of it before. You don't try to do everything under the sun before you release it. Like, get something out and get it moving, right? Get the product in market, get feedback, iterate, and improve. I'm not a product manager. I've had no experience of that, but I've heard this term before, and it kind of sat with me a little bit in terms of how we should be thinking about onboarding, right? So I tweaked it a little bit. And when we think about onboarding, what we want to think about is, what is the MVP, the minimum viable performance of our sales team? Right? We've been hearing, I think Tash was talking earlier today, which was like 10% is training, 20% is coaching, 70% is on-the-job learning. Your sales team is going to learn so much more being on the floor, experiencing, making mistakes, sharpening it up. The purpose of onboarding is not everything under the sun. And it's also not doing every single training that they might ever need working for your company. It's what can you do to get boots on the ground so they can start getting those first wins and building a foundation for them to be successful in the long run. Right? And just going back to that lunch thing, when I mentioned this again, they were like, oh my God, this is amazing. I was like, no, it's not great, but it'll work. Right? So minimum viable performance, right? That's a concept that you want to stick with here, right? When you're thinking and orienting your onboarding. And then I thought with that and went, okay, this is a really nice buzzword and I could probably use it for a TED talk somewhere, but how does this actually translate into building an onboarding program? So the next thing that I did here was, okay, well, how do you generate or benchmark or articulate what is the minimum viable performance for your team? Right? Number one, don't do this in a vacuum. But what you essentially want to do, or what I did, was create a set of capability statements, which was essentially saying at the end of your onboarding program, what statements about your reps do you want to be true? Right? And the way that you do this is obviously pull on your own experience, right? A lot of us have a background in selling of some kind. So think about your experience selling, what you needed to be successful. Go and talk to managers. Go and talk to reps. Go and talk to people in other departments. Do your research and look at like the best practices of sales and create this list and say, okay, well, for my minimum viable performance, what are the set of statements that must be true? Right? Start with the very simple stuff, right? Start with the end goal in mind and work backwards. And the way that you do that for this was the statements. And for me, I probably ended up with somewhere around 30 statements, right? Some things that were very obvious, some things that maybe surprised me a little bit, and some things I kind of came back to later and had to rework, right? Don't seek perfection here, but you need to start somewhere. And then from there, once you have the capability statements, then start aligning, right? So if I want this statement to be true, what are the necessary skills that they need to be able to apply or deliver? What are the processes internally that they must be able to successfully follow? And what is the knowledge that they must understand to do their job? Again, I don't think I'm doing anything particularly innovative here, but this is how it all packages together, right? And what you need to make sure that as you're doing this is that you're referring back to those capability statements and that you are ruthless here, because you are going to need to juggle the requests of the business versus what is best for your stakeholders, i.e. the salespeople. Because when you're building this, I can guarantee you that customer success and CX, or that support, or the solution engineering team, or any of these other teams are going to say, oh, we want to run this session. We want them to get their introduction to customer success now. And it's your job to take a little bit from Tim on the first day, which really stuck with me, by the way, which was like, if someone's not sad, you're not prioritizing. So you've got to be comfortable with that, and you need to make the call, right? And it was a brilliant line, and I'm taking it back, so thank you. Even better, I was a little bit scared for a second. So you need to be ruthless, and you need to make that call, right? What is necessary for you to train and enable them within onboarding versus what will they learn on the job, and what can the managers coach them over time, right? Again, as enablers, we want to think strategic and long-term, so understand onboarding within the context of their sales development. Right? And the final thing here is, as you're going through these, also consider the most effective modality, right? What is the most effective way to deliver these onboardings, that the knowledge will be retained, right? And it will fall into this image that I think Nick first presented yesterday, and then someone else did as well. And I remembered seeing it, bugger, they've all found the same image. Forgetting curve, right? Show of hands, who's familiar with this? Who's aware of it? Pretty much everyone, right? This is something that was created back in 1885, and basically the results were reproduced in 2015, right? So it's relatively consistent in how this works. If anyone has a better model, I'm open to it, but this is the best understanding I have at the moment. And a few things can kind of be pulled out of this that I think are pretty shocking, right? After 1 hour, people generally forget about 50% of what they've heard. 50%. Right? 24 hours, 75%. 1 week, they will have forgotten 90% of what you have told them or the information that they have heard and understood. Right? That is terrifying. And just for a second, contextualize that in how many trainings in your organizations are like the one and dones. Oh, we've trained them on this, now they know it. We've trained them on this, now they can do it. No, they can't. It's not how it works. Right? And on top of this, you then have to layer in adult learning theory, because a lot of the ways that we think about teaching our teams are pulled from kind of like education fundamentals, which is, I'm going to say this word wrong, but like pedagogy, which is the education of children. You're not educating children, you're educating adults. You're educating people generally 18 upwards, at the very least mid-20s, ranging into, until they're not alive anymore. I couldn't find a way to end that one. But essentially, they learn differently, right? They are going to come with a lot more experience, a lot more preset of skills and habits along the way, right? And you need to think about the theories of working memory. You need to think about the theories of attention, of topic clusters, and all these kind of things, right? Because if we consider it from the wrong way, then the information isn't going to be retained, and then the information isn't going to be applied. So we need to be conscious of this when we're developing our program. Doing pretty well for time. So here are a few things that I would suggest that you think about once you have defined your minimum viable performance through your capability statements and then aligned those previous elements. Number 1, topic clusters and session flow. So when I'm talking about topic clusters, we're referring to the idea of our capacity for working memory. How many topics can we keep together at the same time and move around? Generally with an adult, it's about 3 to 5 related topics. So when you're building these sessions and when you're having the sessions flow together, there needs to be some form of cohesion. Right? Has anyone ever gone through like an onboarding session or a training session where you've started with like a sales concept at the start of the day, and then by the end of the day, it's like, meet the contracts team?
I ran that session 2 weeks ago.
I'm so sorry. Right, but those are quite separate topics, right? And the challenge you now run into is, as we saw on the forgetting curve before, they're going to forget half of it, or even more than half of it, right? And if you're introducing a lot of disparate topics, you lose control over what they're going to remember, because it's going to be different for everyone. So if you maintain topic clusters and you think about session flow as they build from day to day and you integrate that knowledge over time, you are influencing or giving yourself a better chance of what's going to be retained, right? And then you match that with experiential repetition, right? This is a very important one for adult learning and adult development, right? Which means that they need to do it. They need to experience it, and they need to do it over and over and over, right? Learning is knowing where you want to get to and like getting wildly off the mark and then getting a little bit closer every time. But they need to do it. So one way that I currently do this in my onboarding is in the very first week, which you'll see a quick image in a second, is that I get them to do their elevator pitch to the group every day for those 5 days. And they start off with about every buzzword under the sun that you can think of, very catchwordy, very technical at times. And over time, we sharpen it up. And every day they get a little bit better, a little bit sharper. You give them feedback. The peers give them feedback. They listen to other people in the room and start to integrate things within themselves. So by the end of that week, they've gone from this really niche, esoteric thing that's almost marketing material to a pitch that they could deliver to their mate at the pub, and they'll understand the value of the business. But they need to do it themselves, right? And then that flows into application and reinforcement. When you teach a concept or when you teach information, they need to have the ability to apply it in a safe setting, so it needs to be okay to fail, but they need to be able to apply it creatively to a problem. Right? So think about this from like a product training perspective, right? If you're training them on a SaaS product that they need to demo, give them a problem to solve within the product, right? So they can kind of play around with it and they can make the mistake and they can learn, and it reinforces it. Another element of this which flows into the next point, which is expectation and define success, right? Make sure they understand what success looks like in the role, but also set clear expectations every day of what they should be doing during onboarding. Right? And we are a little bit of a startup, so maybe what I'm saying right now won't land perfectly, but what I built for everyone was what I called the field sales manual, right? Which was just a useful collection of resources that I found that linked back to Seismic, so integrate your systems together. But every single day, on top of the sessions that we were doing, they would have clearly defined tasks related to those sessions to reinforce whatever they learnt, right? Or to watch a video but then comment on it. Go to a Gong review of someone else's sales call. Here's a framework with Rich to review it, but go and review it. And then the session we do the day after, we're going to talk about it. So it keeps working through. Both. Yeah, good question, right? So expectations, for instance, if you were training SDRs, right? Absolutely make sure that they understand their metrics of success. So for us, that would be 7 SQOs, so 7 sales qualified opportunities every month. And then give them an idea from the activity perspective of what they should be doing every day to reach that. How many businesses should you be researching? How many calls should you be making? How many emails you should be sending and putting people into cadences? Right? So again, we were talking yesterday about building resilience. They can't control how many are going to convert into opportunities, but what they can control are their inputs every day. So help them out by telling them what that should look like. Same with like a salesperson, right? How many opportunities, how many discovery calls for SaaS, how many demos, right? And then do that for the onboarding as well, right? What should you be doing every day? And make sure they understand the importance of the onboarding, the why behind the onboarding, right? If anyone has seen Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, similar kind of thing to that. And then the final thing here is trainers and coach quality, right? These are going to be their field marshals or staff sergeants. I'm not good with military analogies, but the people that are going to be training them in and day out during onboarding. And they need to be engaging, they need to be exciting, they need to be inspiring, and they need to be credible, right? And one thing we were talking about yesterday, which we're seeing more and more enablement, which is amazing, but people coming from a sales background, which means that when you get in the room, and I've heard this feedback several times from people during onboarding, but it's so amazing when you can explain to them a theory or a concept or an idea, and then they ask you a question about it to clarify, and you can say, you know what, this actually reminds me of a deal that I ran one time. And you run them through the deal. And then what they do is sit there and be like, oh, he gets it. He's been in the trenches before. He's made mistakes. He's failed. He understands what we're going through. Right? Can't emphasize trainer and coach quality enough, right? It's not just what you're delivering, but it's so much about how you're delivering it, right? Which ultimately flows into engagement. I think we heard before that humans now have the lower attention span than a goldfish, which is absolutely terrifying, but true. So you need to maintain engagement, right? And on a virtual setting, that's even harder because people can turn off their cameras, they can mute, they can get distracted. Visually, we're very visual creatures. So you need to think of ways to maintain engagement and keep people interested and excited. That's a great question, which I might ask you about later. Engagement over time is tricky. Engagement in the moment is making sure that it's not just delivering at them the whole time. Ask them questions, ask them to think about it, ask them to basically get them included in whatever you're doing, right? Ask for opinions. Engagement over time. Yeah, let's chat later on about that one, but I like the question. One thing that would come to mind as well there is, and this is something that we did in our onboarding flow, is you set, clear success criteria for every week. So what should the ultimate outcome be of that? And it's kind of a soft measure of engagement over time, to be fair, but how well are they executing on that, right? Were they engaged? Were they paying attention? Were they doing the work, right? If they were doing that, then the results are going to start to show for themselves, right? So this is a very simple onboarding flow, and I kind of skimmed it down, and this is for a smaller SaaS company. So read it through that lens, right? Week 1, very simply, systems and tool setup, core selling personas and value prop. Show them what good looks like, right? On the very first day that they join the company, I've got them watching a video of the founder pitching a client. So they can see straight away what the benchmark is, how the people who built this company are articulating the value of the company. And I can guarantee you every single person that has watched that has commented the next day of how valuable that was, right? And that is a genuine sales call. It's not just pitching internally, right? And then they start to master that elevator pitch, right? And this is what really everyone in the organization should be doing. It doesn't matter what your role is, right? If you're in this company, there's a little bit of sales in you. So you should be mastering this pitch, right? Week 2, ignore the lack of center on the week. Prospecting fundamentals, right? Call practice, mastering digital outreach across all channels. Email, LinkedIn, video prospecting. For Southeast Asia, WhatsApp, right? Always have to make this regional. And starting to introduce whatever qualification framework you're using within your organization. For us, MedPick. Week 3, going into discovery fundamentals, right? This is where you probably start to integrate any sales methodologies that you're using as well, right? Because again, these things are meant to be a little bit more timely of what their experience is going to be like in your organization, right? Discovery fundamentals, questioning and communication techniques, forecasting, and then mastering the full pitch, right? So again, these things are building on each other over time, right? Because by this time, they'll have known ideal customer profile, the personas, they'll have done research, they'll have done outreach. Now we can start going into discovery when they can start to think about the right questions they need to build and ask people. And then week 4, demo fundamentals, demo build framework, and ultimately storytelling, right? And the great thing here is that storytelling flows into enhancing their ability of the full pitch. Yes?
Sorry if you already answered this, but how many hours per week is this?
How many hours per week?
Full time, or is it 50-50?
So it changes a little bit. It's a good question. It changes over time. So I would say week 1 and week 2 are full time. Week 3, you start to find that little bit of a balance, right? Because they're going to start to have activities that they need to do. Even though they're on a ramped quota, it's a quota nonetheless. So their manager's going to start to ask them to do things. And then week 4, you can kind of see, right? The topics do scale back a little bit. And it should be contextual for whatever the expectations of the business are.
And is that week 1 of onboarding, or their week 1 in your business?
Week 1 in our business. Right? Like
We have 2 weeks of self-directed e-learning, and then you do your onboarding.
No, and look, this is where, different organizations, you need to contextualize this for you, but my thought is get them right into it, get them going, right? Because that's when they're going to be hungriest, right? And you want to inspire them and they want to be excited to learn more. And that's through the engagement, right?
That's like ours. Day 2 is week 1, day 2 at work.
Perfect. I'm very aware of time, so I might just speed through the last ones and then people give me questions, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll go to the end. And then finally, we start to integrate that product and platform knowledge kind of halfway through week 2, right? Because again, we want to kind of contextualize it within all the other skills that they're learning. And sometimes I've seen in companies, we start with the product way too early before they've even understood the value with which the product brings to our customers, right? Help them understand the why and the value first, then give them the how over time.
Sorry, I've got
Yeah.
one more question. Do you hire in waves to make this achievable?
Yes. Yeah, well, when we started, it was kind of one-on-one, and then I was staggering 3 individual groups over. I'll tell you a story about that sometime. It was a mess. I didn't sleep, it was a whole thing. These are some cool, really anecdotal pieces of evidence that I've just heard from the team, right? I love how everything flows from what we did the day or the week before. It just makes sense. It's clear every day what I need to be doing, right? That's kind of like the anecdotal, qualitative things you want to be hearing in an onboarding, right? Because no one's truly inspired to do onboarding or ever excited. So if we're hearing things like this, right, we've got to be kind of hitting the mark, right? And I'm not saying it's perfect, but it means we're in the right direction. Yes?
Sorry, quick question on that. How do you evaluate? Did you collect that through, was it sent like a survey or was it?
So all of these ones individually were unprompted.
Just love letters directly to
Love letters directly to me, which was beautiful. Really, really fed the ego on that one. But on top of that, we also had follow-up surveys as well, right? Absolutely. So yeah, using surveys, right? Because this is never done. You're always wanting to see what could we be better at? What have we missed? What do you wish was included? And that's where you can get more granular with the surveys, right? How are individual sessions and what's going on. Some quick early results, and this is from one AE, just because we're not a huge organization yet. But after going through this onboarding, we know what the average sales cycle is for someone in the growth or small business segment. He was able to decrease it by about 16%. He was able to prospect about 150K worth of opportunities exclusively through email. And then as a general result, when we went to feedback and NPS scoring around the onboarding, thinking about that 11% before that actually found it satisfying and fitting for job, so far we're at 100%, which is amazing. Thank you. I realize I've gone a little bit over time, but thank you very much, everyone. If anyone has questions later, I'd be happy to answer anything for this one.